Florida State's defensive tackles will be a strength in 2024.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Florida State defensive line coach Odell Haggins speaks the truth, Florida State's defensive tackle size, and the experience and depth that the Noles have at defensive tackle is going to allow them to have a strength in the middle of the defense in 2024. Hi, my name is Brian Smith, and this show is going to feature the defensive tackles, what's ahead for the Noles through the rest of spring practice, and why it's going to be one of the best defensive lines in the ACC and could help the Noles make a major push for the playoffs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. So here's the deal. Again, number one, Odell Haggins speaks the truth. I'll define that momentarily. Two, we're talking about the size that Florida State has in the middle. Teams that don't have defensive tackle size, good luck. Number three, there's a little more depth than I thought, and a promising young man that we'll talk about shortly as well. So let's get started. Number one, Odell Haggins. Obviously a legend at Florida State. He's been the defensive line coach a long time. He's been interim head coach. He is a guy that is very well respected around Tallahassee with the media and, quite frankly, across college and professional football. He is unlike most, not all, but most coaches that I watch a podcast or interview, whatever it may be, during game, out of season, doesn't matter. Most coaches do everything they can to give broad general questions because they don't want to talk to me. Let's not kid ourselves. Odell, on the other hand, while he may not prefer it, I don't know for sure, he certainly is a lot more direct. In 3 to 4 minutes, you'll get more out of Odell Haggins than you do other guys for 20. That's the bottom line. He's one of the few guys that I won't say the following. I trust nothing that they say. Head coaches in particular, I have very little interest in their press conferences as a general rule. Odell is a little bit different. He made a couple of key points about the defensive tackles. Daryl Jackson and some of the guys that are coming along, Daniel Lyons. I mean, it's a different guy for every person who they think is going to start, where they're going to play at, nose guard, D-tackle, all that. That will take care of itself. I'm not going to get into those specifics today. But he talked about the effort and everybody trying to get better with consistency. Probably used that single word a half dozen times or something related to it, at least. And he's probably right. It was the first day of pads, how it went, all of that. I get it. But I was really happy, and I was curious about this because he brought up a few guys by name, which most coaches, again, remember, generalities. They do everything they can not to mention players. He went into depth. Talked about Grady Kelly, the transfer from Colorado State, and he really likes it. Talked about Daryl Jackson. He's a guy, he can be a big-time player. Is basically what I took from it. I'm summarizing here, but he kept going on and on. He was positive. If Odell thinks they look bad, he's going to tell you. I mean, there's very few guys that I would trust more than him in a press conference of any kind. After practice, suit and tie, whatever it is, doesn't matter. He's pretty consistent, and he's earned that right too. And the other thing, just kind of going through it, listening to Odell, you look at the depth chart, however you want to organize it. Well, again, at this point, there really isn't one. Everybody's big. The smallest guy is Grady Kelly, going by the list. He's like 270, 280, somewhere in that range. If that is your smallest guy in a D-tackle rotation, especially in a 4-3 defense where you can be a little smaller because it's about getting downhill and creating havoc, you should be okay. Now, they'll probably play a little 3-man line, a little 4-man line, because everybody does. I don't care what they say now. There's so many formations you got to prepare for. You almost have to play some 3-man line in today's world. Grady Kelly might be able to play D-end, too, at that side. There's different ways to use these guys, which is a humongous benefit to Florida State. Just throwing that in there. But then the last thing is the depth. And I'll talk a little bit more about this with development in a few minutes. But there's a guy that hasn't been talked about much because he barely played last year. He was a freshman. It's not shocking. It's KJ Sampson out of North Carolina. Like the 247 composite or whatever, had him like the number 203 player or whatever. But you cannot teach 6'3" 300 pounds. So that the two things go together, the depth and the size. Florida State has both. Like at best, he's the 5th defensive lineman on the interior. When you have a guy that's ranked around number 200 in the country that offers from pretty much, the entire South, and he's your 5th guy, it tells me two things. You're going to be able to give your starters more rest, even if he's just taking 10, 15 snaps a game this next fall, on average. If KJ's your 5th guy, you're going to use pretty much your 2 deep as long as you can, because those are your best guys. But if somebody goes down, you have a 300-pounder that is offered by numerous programs across the country. If that's your 5th option, where are you in the pecking order of the teams you play? That's really what's most relevant. Florida State's way ahead. So to go back to the first point about Odell's comments, he mentioned KJ. I think this is important. Mentioning a guy that's like 5th, and this is my guess, because there's no such thing as a depth chart at this point. There's really not. That's a great sign. If it was some other random first-year D-line coach, I'd have kind of brushed it aside. Haggins is different, though. So I want to give you a few examples here in just a couple of minutes on how this is going to play out in my eyes. And this is just going on experience from following college football for a long time and watching FSU's D-lines for 30-plus years. I think this is a great sign because even Bowden, this is one of my favorite lines that he ever said that wasn't just some off the cuff comment trying to be funny, but he said you can never have enough defensive line. One guy gets hurt, it can just screw up everything. And he didn't really expand on it, but my take on that was always the same. And it's why size is so important. If you force double teams in the middle of a defense, doesn't matter if it's Darryl, it doesn't matter which guy it is, Daniel Lyons, whatever. That opens up the linebackers, which, let's be honest, Florida State's pretty thin. They need to take as few shots as they can from the interior offensive linemen and stuff. They just don't have the depth. They don't. And I'm sure they're trying to get somebody in the portal, and they will, and all that. I'm looking at it from where they are right now. There's no guarantee they'll get who they want in the portal either that can really help. Who knows? But you need to help the other guys behind you, allow them to run around and make plays. That's one. And number two, that's also going to cause a lot of problems for teams just running the football. Florida State's secondary is not going to be fun for people, folks. It is not. They are nasty. That is a really talented group. If Florida State's as good as what I think it is going to be, a defensive tackle, again, I could be wrong. It's going by Odell, the size and the depth. Again, those are the three things. This has a chance to be one of the best defenses in the ACC. I don't want to say country yet because I have my reservations about the linebacker corps, especially if there's any injuries, and every one of you should too. But that changes some things. 2nd down and 8 is not friendly. If you just got 2-yard gain and it was just a pile of humanity, are you going to run it again and risk it being 3rd and 6? And then you have guys like Marvin Jones coming off the edge, Patrick Payton, etc. Whoever it is. Florida State's got some edge guys. They don't have as much depth quite as much as I'd like, but they do have some top-end talent. Then you got that secondary. If Florida State's defensive tackles are as good as I think, that's important. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a second, but take the following question in hand before we do. Name the last time you felt confident in saying the following. Florida State has 5 defensive tackles, 275 to 300, some bigger. Name the last time you felt confident that Florida State's defensive tackles against an elite team could be dominant. And when was the last time it really showed out like that for an entire season? Not for a game, for an entire season. Like our D tackles are just going to beat the bejesus out of these guys. When was that? How many years ago? I think Florida State is trending in that direction again. They're getting some good defensive linemen. Maybe if they can get, again, if they get one more portal guy, it'd be great. But again, when was the last time that entire season you're like, D-tackle, we're just going to dominate up front? Not good, dominate. Because that is the difference between being an elite team consistently and being a good one. Teams are just in a bad spot at 2nd down and 8. So with that, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on the college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, here's the deal. I mentioned KJ Sampson as a guy that's like the fifth person. And it's the reason I brought up the question at the end of the moment, just a few moments ago. Most years, KJ would be competing for, over the last 4 or 5, he'd have been competing for the starting role or likely to get it as a second-year player, top 200-ish recruit. And maybe he still ends up being. I'm not saying he can't. But Florida State has added enough girth to do that. So how does that impact the defense? I gave a general basic look at it just a second ago, but does it really help to have a fifth guy? Well, it's oftentimes the difference between winning and losing. I'll give you a scenario, and it's going to happen whether you like it or not. You can pick the player. But one of those 4, I'll bet you in the first 4 games, at least one of them misses a game, conservatively. And there could be somebody else they move in there, whatever. Again, I know the transfer portal is going to open, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are there. But if you can move somebody like KJ into the 2 deep, whether he earns it, whether he moves up, whatever, that's just because he's getting the reps and doing better. Again, Odell Haggins brought him up as somebody that's done well so far this spring. Need to see more because he's learning, needs to be more aggressive, kind of take the bull by the horns, if you will. But you can't teach 6'3", 300 pounds and athletic. So whether that's a big game, like, they play Georgia Tech, that's a good football team moving forward. They got an experienced quarterback. You never know. The Heat, just in August, could be a much different scenario for some of these kids than some others because they're 300 pounds. They might have somebody having cramp problems, might have muscle injury, whatever. And even going to a Georgia Tech game, it may not be perfect. You may have guys cramping in the middle of the second quarter. Who knows? I know that game is kind of weird because of where it starts and all that. I get it. But it's a possibility. You just can't have enough of these guys. And it goes back to Odell talking about the consistency. I'm hoping, and it's just me rooting for it, that KJ Sampson's one of the guys that quote unquote pushes the pile towards the top of the depth chart. Because if he does, that's going to make Darrell better, Joshua, everybody else, Daniel Lyons, etc. It really doesn't matter which one when you see somebody like that coming up because they fit the profile. Like, he's 300 pounds. And then that also makes it a lot easier for those edge guys, man. You can do a lot more games, a lot more stunts. You can play a little more of the zone fire. You can do anything you want defensively. And this staff has enough guys that have coached together now. They can pretty much call up about anything. My only question, again, I hate to bring this up, is the linebacker experience. They have injuries. I'm concerned about being as versatile as what I'm saying. And they may even play some more DB packages and just go extra small because they have so many good DBs. But whatever the case is, you're going to see guys coming from everywhere. The Kalen DeLoach blitz that basically gave them a chance to win the Clemson game is a great example. Hey, man, you caught Cade Klubnik flush, and it changed the game. Changed the season for both teams, really. One play can do that. But you can't have that play if your defensive tackles aren't holding up because they were driving. It looked like something's going to happen for Clemson, and then, boom, you get a big play. That's why having this many defensive tackles is absolutely paramount. To that point, I'm going to transition to recruiting here a little bit. This is what the difference in winning and losing is in football anyway. Got a bunch of notes about recruits, but one of the kids they had on campus this past weekend was Myron Charles. Another kid, he's 6'3", 295, 300, something like that. I know him pretty well. He's from Port Charlotte. It's about an hour north of Fort Myers. You can't have enough guys like that. He's in the Daniel Lyons, KJ, any of those guys that are the 280 and up, they can move. He's in that category. I was at a 5-on-5 recently with him and a bunch of other guys they're recruiting, Max Buchanan, Zaire Addison, who I think might go to Florida State, had a great visit this weekend. All these guys. They see this fall, what I'm talking about, if what I think, and again, I could be wrong, but I really think this is going to be a good group. If guys like Myron see this, that's how you get them. They want to be able to say, you're already doing it, not just projecting it. That's what I want to be a part of. When I was growing up watching Florida State football, the recruits that would come in and when they were interviewed, they talked about what it's like to play D-line at Florida State. When I got into recruiting and started interviewing kids, they talked about the same thing. Didn't matter if it was an end or a tackle. They wanted to play with guys that were very talented, that had proven it. This is Florida, like they're on the edge of that because the last couple of years, they've had some pretty darn good D-lines, but they can take it up another notch if they've got more defensive tackle depth, especially if they're allowed to, again, this is my opinion, Darrell Jackson to be fresh in the fourth quarter. That's a guy not many people are going to block. Just my opinion. But this is the key. If you want to continue it beyond 24, you want it to be 25, 26 and on, you got to get guys like Myron Charles on campus, let Odell coach him up. It's going to take a year or two. But you got to get to the point, and somebody mentioned this in the press conference, where it's 2-3 years down the line, then it's their time. If they beat other people out before, then it's a bonus. Too often in the last 5-6 years for Florida State, there have been defensive linemen, especially if there was an injury, a young guy had to play too early. Not always, but there were times. And that's going to bite you in the butt. So Myron is a kid that was on campus. I don't know if he's going to go to Florida State or not. A lot of people think he will. Seems to be leaning that way. When I talked to him a couple weekends ago, I had a conversation. I think he's going to end up staying in state. I will be shocked otherwise. A quick anecdote. I don't think I brought this up, but like he was freezing to death and we were in the Atlanta area at a tournament. If he's freezing in Atlanta, he ain't going far from home. Okay. Let's be honest. Atlanta's not that cold. It was 30s and 40s. It wasn't great, but it's not exactly Buffalo, New York. So anyway, that's the key to there. Also with recruiting, I'm just going to run down some of these guys. Javion Hilson was there at the same tournament. Know him well. He's on the borderline of being a 5-star. He's a defensive end. Those kind of guys are going to see what Odell's talking about. He's committed to the Noles, but that doesn't mean everybody and their brother is not coming after him. They are. He's from Cocoa, elite program. They won state championship last year. I think that's a kid that can come in and play right away at Florida State. He's the kind of edge rusher that the Noles used to get in the 90s and early 2000s that every school in the country wanted. Do you think he wants to play with really good defensive linemen? Of course he does. It wouldn't shock me if him and Myron ended up in Tallahassee. You got to have guys like that. So this kind of goes together. Again, just to summarize, I trust in what Odell said. That's the number one reason I think Florida State's defensive line, especially defensive tackle here, is going to be good. Two, they got a lot of size, man. Everybody's big, and then they got some depth. If you got KJ Sampson as your fifth guy, you're in pretty good shape. So with that being stated, we're going to talk a little bit more about recruiting coming up here in just a second on Locked on Seminoles. All right. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. For superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Also, Nissan. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 SUVs, these guys are able to take it to the next level. The North Carolina Tar Heels can be described as an Armada. The one seed is a hardcore as it gets out there, so it's no wonder they secured a spot in the Sweet 16 this Thursday against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. They're a favorite pick by many to make a run for the championship. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. I'm going to run down some other recruiting notes that I have from talking to recruits and just kind of reading the tea leaves based on videos and different things that I picked up. Some of these kids I know pretty well, so I don't think this is going to shock some people, but take it for what it's worth. But again, Hilson had a great visit. That's probably the most important thing. I just mentioned that at the end a few minutes ago of the last segment, but he's a really important recruit for Florida State. Cannot lose him. Big time defensive end that is a pure pass rusher. Got to have him. Jamie French, I've heard a million things on him. He's Tramel Jones, who I'm going to have on the show here pretty soon. That's his teammate, and Tramel's the quarterback committed to Florida State. He could go a lot of places. Tennessee's making a run at him. McIntyre, the kid that's committed to Tennessee, is trying to recruit him there. We'll see. Ohio State wants him. That would be, in my opinion, the biggest threat long term. But I like Florida State if they have a really good season this year. Keywords, if they do. That is a really long recruitment. That is going to be a signing day deal. Jamie French, we'll wait and see. Let's talk about a kid that I didn't know much about until I just watched film of him today, and I want to try to pronounce this right. Zadrius Rainey Sale. He is a space player. What I mean by that, he's a linebacker that's kind of a hybrid safety. He's out of the state of Washington, which is random, but he's been to Florida State's camp. He's been unofficial visit again. This is a kid that's locking in an OV with the Noles. Top 200 kid by pretty much anybody's account. He can run. He fits the old school Florida State mentality. Multiple visits from across the country. For whatever the reason, he likes Florida State. So I don't know the backdrop, but that's a really good football player. I would imagine that Florida State is in a pretty good spot there. He could be the overhang linebacker, maybe grow into a will. I like Florida State's opportunities. I've got Zaire Addison I'm going to have on the show soon. He's the offensive lineman that I mentioned. Clemson, Oregon, Florida State, UCLA, and I forget the other one, but he's pretty much got his visits lined up. I'm not sure if he's going to visit Miami, which kind of surprises me, but that could change. Right now, Florida State is trending for him. Can't find enough left tackles. I brought up Hilson. Addison's another kid I know well, also on the 5-on-5 circuit with California Power, by far the best program on the 5-on-5 circuit. He does a great job with using his feet. He's getting stronger. He's a former defensive lineman and basketball player. If Florida State gets him, that's a top 200 kid again, maybe top 100, depending on how you want to rank him. Nationally, he's out of Sumner High School, just south of Tampa. Like to keep kids in state as well. National recruit, recently got an Alabama offer. He's got 40 offers, give or take. Florida State could be in for a really good O-line class if they can get him, because the other guy I want to talk about is another 5-on-5 guy with California Power that was there. That's Max Buchanan from Seminole High School, just north of Orlando. Another team that's always competitive in the playoffs. They won a state title a couple of years ago. He's an interior guy, probably going to play center. Atkinson and all of them can figure that out if it comes to Florida State. But Miami, UCF, Clemson, a whole bunch of programs like him. Really aggressive kid, and he's a pretty crazy guy. He's kind of fits that interior O-line mentality. I think he could be a really good football player. Florida State's right there. I'll ask him when I'm going to have him on my show as well. I think Florida State's got a great chance, but he's still trying to figure it out. The visit's only going to help with him. Also, this one surprised me, and I don't know this kid. I've only seen him play. I'm just going to mention it. Westlake High School, west side of Atlanta, Juan Gaston, offensive tackle. It's 340-ish, give or take. He is humongous. 6'7", 6'8". Everybody thought he was going to Georgia. UGA signed 6'0" linemen in their last class. That's a lot. Maybe he doesn't go there. Florida State's all over him. He just visited. If they could get him to go with Zaire Addison, that'd be pretty impressive. Also, Alvin Henderson visited. This one's tough to read for me. I thought for a while he was going to commit to Auburn, and I thought Florida State or Miami was number 2, but he came back down to Florida State again. So we'll see, but my guess is he'll commit to Auburn. I spoke to him a couple weekends ago. It's hard to say, but he's going to take trips. He's taking a Miami visit in the latter half of June and kind of go from there. But Florida State is the other school that I think is right there with him. Penn State and Oregon may or may not get OVs. He thinks he's going to take trips there, but we'll see. But that's a kid to watch. He is an unbelievable running back. He had 61 rushing touchdowns as a junior. Now, I know it's 1A program, Elba, Alabama, but 61? That's just utterly ridiculous. Dallas Golden came up. He's the corner out of Berkeley Prep in Tampa. Every school in the country wants the kid. He can pick up the phone, call whoever he wants. I think Clemson and Notre Dame are the 2 schools. Maybe Georgia, Ohio State, Florida State. but he did visit this past weekend. We'll have to see on that. I spoke with him recently, but I think Clemson or Notre Dame is the best bet. I haven't heard anything since the visit, but I need to find out more on him. He's a hell of a player. Byron Lewis. This is an interesting deal because Pringle, the running back out of Armwood High School on the edge of Tampa, just committed to Miami. The Canes have taken 2 running backs in each of the last 2 classes, and they just got him. I thought Byron would go to Florida State or Miami. Does he really want to be one of 6 guys in 3 classes? I don't know. Gerard Pringle is a really good player, different kind of guys. A little shorter, quicker, darted guy, makes people miss in space. He's really good. But Byron is a little bit bigger, a little more power, a little more straight line, and he'll make a guy miss or catch it out of the backfield and make a guy miss too. Maybe Florida State gets him now. I don't know. Maybe that helps that Pringle committed to Miami. It's interesting because at some point it's just how many guys can you have in a backfield? Miami's pretty loaded back there, but Florida State's got pretty good depth too. Some of it's going to be leaving, though. I don't think Florida State's best runner is going to leave after this year. That's Mark Fletcher. He's only going to be a sophomore. So that's a little more crowded for the Canes. I think it's going to come down to those 2 schools. We'll see. It could be somebody else, but probably Florida State or Miami for Byron Lewis. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Really enjoy talking about defensive line play and O-line play. I like the trenches a lot. And again, I'm really happy that Odell was so positive about his defensive tackles and honest. Like you could tell, he was just direct A to B. That's important. So Odell's honesty, the size they have, and the experience, I really think Florida State's D-line, specifically on the interior, has a chance, and that's going to help everybody around them. The secondary, the edge guys, the linebackers, everything. You cannot have enough defensive tackles. Florida State's trending in the right direction there. Well, with that, everybody have a great day. Take care.